Orqa are still one of the biggest brands in FPV. That isn't because they are constantly releasing new products or grabbing lots of headlines. It's because when Orqa do release a new product, it's generally very good. Even today, their goggles are still one of the top choices among FPV racers, and in fact, their goggles, the FPV.One pilots, still have a feature that no other FPV goggle has, and that is the ability to record its HDMI input. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a new product from Orqa called the Dream X. Now, this is Orqa's first ready-to-fly drone, built up from all of their years of learning about FPV from the goggles, making components, and they've now decided to release their own ready-to-fly drone. Now, what we're going to do today is give you an overview of this new product, walk you through its features and a little bit of its capabilities, and then at the very end, I'm going to share with you my thoughts. Now, just before we get into it, I do need to be crystal clear that Orqa did reach out to me to take a look and review this product. They have not, though, paid me to make this video. They have not seen this video before it's been published, and as always, my thoughts are entirely my own. Okay, so this is the Dream X. Now, as you can see here, it is still fully sealed. I have not even opened it at this point. Just to walk you around the packaging a little bit, it looks like it's got this box that folds open. You can see that there are like hinges there, or it lifts off. I'm not sure. It looks to fold open, but we'll see as we move through. There's not really a lot to show you on the box other than that. So I think what we'll do is carefully break the seal up there to get into it. You're going to have my live reaction on this one as I talk it through. I do have a spec sheet in front of me as well, so I will be reading from that. However, here we go. So, does it open up? Yes, it does. And there's a note inside. So, there is this card from Orqa and a little note just thanking me for doing the review. That's very nice, and that is a first. I have not had one of them before. Thank you for that. So, inside, we have the quad. Now, the box does hinge open. There are stickers, which is always great to see. Lots of different stickers, in fact. Some stickers of Orqa goggles. We've got some of the Orqa stickers there. We've got some additional Orqa stickers there. And then we find the quad itself hidden within. Now, the Dream X is really a quad that's designed to showcase everything that Orqa's been working on over the last few years. It is a 5-inch quad based on their own frame design. It is based on their own flight controller, their own ESC, their own RC system with ImmersionRC Ghost, their own FPV camera, motors, and everything other than sundry items like an XT60 here and there, a bit of wiring, is made by them. Now, before we look over the quad in a bit more detail, the first thing you will notice is there is something on this particularly unusual, and that is the fact it comes fitted with folding props. Now, don't worry, you can fit your own props onto this as well if you want to, but out the factory, they are shipping it with these folding props. Rather unusual, actually. Not something you see very often on a 5-inch quad, but for those who have used folding props before, like I have on other quads, it's actually quite handy at times. Now, there is the quad itself, and we will look over it a bit more in a minute. Before we do that, though, let's go through whatever else we get in the pack. So up this side here, we have some additional spare screws and a band. And then in this little pack over here, we have a prop nut spanner. Very nice. It's a ratcheted one as well, I will add. And some additional accessories there as well for it. Now, walking you over the details on this quad in a bit more detail, it is a 5-inch quad frame with 6mm arms. Looking around the design, you can see that the arms go through there. They appear to lock in the center. There's a single nut that goes through the arm there, and it continues through to the center section. There's a nut in the middle, which is interesting. I don't think that nut goes through the arms. No, what there looks to be is a top plate that goes on top of the arms to hold them in, so they'll all go into the middle. They've probably got machined ends that match, and then you've got a top and a bottom plate that sandwich them in. It is based on the Orqa 20x20 F722 flight controller and the Orqa 20x20 60 amp ESC. That is all connected and pre-wired, as you can see there, and that is all looking really very, very tidy indeed. We'll jump in a minute on the close-up so you can see that, but the wiring is actually coming down off the motors here through the stack into the center. That is one of the cleanest builds I think I have ever seen on a quad. We then have ImmersionRC Ghost built into this as standard. You can see we have the hybrid for that. So you've got the ImmersionRC VTX up the back, which has the built-in Ghost receiver as well. And then we have their toothless camera up front, which is that one there. And then they say their Lollipop version 4 5.8 gigs antenna, which is that one there up back. That's held in place with this TPU bracket. Now, taking a closer look at the components used on this, you can see there just how much space there is inside. And it's not because it's a massive frame. It really isn't. It's actually two things. It's the choice of components, and I'll talk about that in a second, but it's also just the way they've done the build. As I said earlier, they've put the motor wires through and around and out, and I really do love that design. You can see there the bottom of the pads look like there's nothing connected. It really does just make a very nice, clean and tidy build. Now, with regards to the components, as I've said already, we are using their Orqa 722 flight stack. We'll look at that closer when we pull the lid off, as well as their 60 amp ESC. Up back, you will find something rather interesting, and this is the ImmersionRC Ghost Ultimate Hybrid combined Ghost receiver and analog VTX. This is a 30x30 design unit. It features Ghost built in, that is 2.4 gigahertz. You can see the antenna connector there for that, and then that is the antenna there strapped on the bottom of the frame. But it also has built in a 1.5 watt analog FPV VTX. The antenna for that is the Lollipop one over there, and if we spin around, you can see our antenna connector for that there. What is really nice about this unit is it is 30x30 in size. It offers FPV and receiver all in one. It has all of the great features of Ghost in the sense of it does the very high rate 500 Hz race modes, but the low rates long range modes as well. It supports 25 milliwatt to 1500 milliwatt on 5.8 gigahertz for the analog VTX as well. Supports up to 48 standard channels, and it's what they call thermally regulated and factory calibrated, and it really offers a very nice clean and tidy build because you then have a single wiring harness that goes across into our flight controller. What makes this such a clean build is the fact that you do have that all-in-one there. You have what they call their toothless camera up front. You can see there, if I just flip it round underneath, you can see the badge for that there. And then you can see we've simply got the wiring harness for that going into the flight controller, then the wiring harness going down there into the VTX and receiver unit. With regards to everything else, there's not really a lot to show you. You've got a capacitor there soldered on, our wires then heading back to our XT60 connector up back. If I flip it over underneath, you can see through a little bit easier. So there you can see the bottom of the main pads, and then we can see our wiring connection there for our ESC as well. There is tons of space in this frame simply because of the choice of the components that they've used that just offers that additional room. Next, moving over to the motors and the props. Now, as you can see, the motors are Orqa branded. They are a 2207 in size with a rating of 1900 kVs. Now, if I just flip it up there, you can see it is a uni-bell design. It is fitted, though, with a 4mm titanium shaft. Flipping over to the bottom and just taking a look at the magnets and the windings, they are the N55SH magnets in a 12N14P configuration. It's fitted with NSK 684 bearings, and each motor, they say, weighs just 31.5 grams without the main cables. Looking around them, they do look nicely well made. Pretty much what we'd expect from a high quality motor from any brand out there today. Nothing particularly special, but certainly no downsides that I can see here. With regards to the props that they fitted from the factory, as I've said, they are these folding props, which is rather unusual. They are the F5135Rs. These, though, are not specific for this quad. You can fit any props onto this you want. These are just what it ships with from the factory. Now, I've just removed the top of the quad. You can now see the board in a bit more detail. What you can see is that it does appear to be conformal coated. Now, they don't actually say that in any of the paperwork, so I'm not going to say every single one is going to come like this, but the model I've got here certainly looks like it does have a coating on board. Now, this just gives you a bit of a closer look at their flight controller. You can see there as well just how simple the wiring is inside. There really isn't a huge amount to show you here, simply because of just how clean it is. What you can see though is the XT60 connector is actually on a separate little board on the back. It's not actually part of the top main plate. It bolts on at the back there. You can then see our combined VTX and our receiver in a bit more details, as well as our capacitor. With regards to doing any work on this, it really is going to be one of the simplest quads out there to work on. About the only thing I would say is swapping the arms is a little bit more involved, in the sense of the wiring does go through the middle of the stack, but you don't have to put it back that way if you are going to swap it. Now, looking around the rest of the quad, there are a lot of nice little features that Orqa have done just to make it as good as it possibly can be. For instance, we have our camera, which is mounted in TPU mounts. We've got a pre-installed GoPro mount, which is not typically unusual. However, what they have done is mounted it on little inserts, which means it shouldn't tear out in the event of a crash. You've got then a little TPU protection piece down the front there. On the battery area, we've got this foam. This helps hold the battery in place. It's not super grippy, but with the grippy battery strap, it's not going to go anywhere at all. And then at the back, we've got our antenna for our VTX, which is held in this TPU bracket. When you look around it, there are just a lot of nice little touches. You've got on the bottom these sort of little feet that help keep the quad off the ground when you're putting it down. You can see there just little TPU pieces. If we look at the ends of the arms, they've actually countersunk the motor screws, and there's no hole in the center, just to help with strengthening the end of this arm. If you're going to bando bash this, Orqa do talk about just how well the end of this arm holds up, simply because of the carbon fiber they've chosen, but they've also tried to keep the holes and everything as minimal as they can. And then in the center here, as I mentioned earlier, your arms do go into the center post all the way through to here, and in the middle of this there's actually an insert inside that actually helps hold the arms nice and solid as well. And what you can see is Orqa have put a lot of thought not only into the design of the frame, but the whole design of the quad as well. Now, as you've seen, this version of the Dream X is based on analog FPV, but there is also a digital ready version as well. That allows you to install your own digital FPV VTX. It's compatible with the likes of DJI FPV, Avatar HD, or even HD0, allowing you to install whatever system suits you. Now, this version, having analog, is obviously compatible with all of the usual analog FPV systems out there. Obviously, Orqa are going to recommend you use it with a set of their FPV goggles in combination with something like the Rapid Fire. That should give you the best possible performance from the analog FPV system. However, if you don't have a set of Orqas, or you don't want to buy a new set of goggles, it should be compatible with normal analog FPV goggles that are out there. You may just need to change the channels. With regards to the remote control system, this comes pre-installed with ImmersionRC Ghost, as I've said already. Now, depending on what your radio setup is, you can choose to install a Ghost module in your radio. If you've got a JR bay, we have the Ghost module here. This will allow you to convert your radio into Ghost just like you would with any other handset. Or Orqa actually have their own FPV handset specifically designed for this drone, but also any Ghost compatible quad. This is not only ideal for sim use, and they actually have their own software that you can download to allow you to actually train yourself on flying FPV, but you also then have the Ghost module that you install in the back, making it fully compatible not only with this quad, but any other Ghost-based system as well. Now, before we move on to actually setting up the Dream X, there's one other thing I just want to mention, and that is about manufacturing. Orqa are a brand that are rather unusual in the fact that they are based in Europe. They're in Croatia, and they actually even manufacture many of their components and products in Croatia as well. Many of the components used in this drone, such as the flight controllers, are NDAA compliant, and whilst the Dream X itself isn't fully NDAA compliant, many of the components used within it is. If you're looking to support a brand in Europe, Orqa are definitely one of the ones to look at, because not only do they generally make high quality, decent products, but they are based in Europe, in Croatia as well. Now, before we can fly, the first thing we're going to need to do is bind this quad to our radio. Now, I've already done the setup for this radio. I'm going to cover that in a separate video. I'm not going to walk you through that today. What I will show you is the binding process. At this moment in time, the radio is all set up and connected to my remote controller. Now, we're going to need to power this up and hit the bind button. It may come in an unbound state, and that way you'll be able to connect it directly, but it is possible that these quads are checked at the factory and you might need to do the manual binding. Now, before powering on, I would strongly advise you remove the props. Today, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to use a short saver that will trip out if the motors tried to power up, but I would advise you not to do it this way and do it by removing the props. That is always the safest way of doing it. So what we're going to do is just move that to there, slightly away from that prop just in case. I've got the radio there on the home screen. So what we're going to need to do on this is go into the Ghost menu, and we're here in the menu ready for us to be able to bind. I'm going to power up the quad, and I'm going to keep an eye on the LEDs. At the moment, they're not doing what I would expect them to do with regards to the binding mode. So what I'm going to do instead is grab myself a screwdriver. There is a button located between the two LEDs on the back here. So what I'm going to do is press that. The LED has now gone blue. And then on the radio, I'm going to click bind, start bind. You can now see that it says success. It has connected and we should be all ready to go. If we now look at the LEDs on the back, it's hard to show you in this light, but we've got a green LED at the top and an amber LED at the bottom, and that should mean everything is connected and ready to go. Now, the next thing we're going to need to do is connect to Betaflight. I've got my USB connection in here, and now you can see we're connected to the Betaflight configurator. Now, the version the quad has shipped with is version 4.41. If we check our remote controller is working as expected, if we go down to our receiver window, we can now do our checks. So we can check our throttle. There we go. That is working as expected. Our yaw, pitch, roll, all of that looks correct. If we then just go down to our modes window, now we can just check everything is correct here. So if I just grab the remote, I'm going to assume the arming button is the latching one on the shoulder there. So I'm just going to press that. There we go. We can see that arming works. We'll check our mode switch. There we go. It is the one on the left-hand side that is configured to that as standard. So we've got angle, horizon, and then our standard rate modes. And then if we scroll down, let's just have a look if anything else is set. It is. We have our beeper. So on the switch on the other side, they've configured beeper as standard. So beeper's in the middle. And have they got flip over crash? Yes, they have. So you've got flip over crash and beeper pre-installed on that one there. And that is all of the options as they're set today. Now, the next thing I want to show you is how you can configure the VTX video power output as well as the RC power output via the Orqa app. Now, once you have this all connected, you can go into the Ghost menu and you have several options. We have the mode options for the remote controller. This allows us to set the rate. So, for instance, we've got the region. You've got your rate mode, which is the RF mode. So at the moment, we've got normal, but you can set race, pure race, long range, race 250, race 500, solid 250, normal. They are like the different modes of operation that are available on the other RC systems. I set it to normal, but there's a lot more information about that in the Ghost manual if you're interested in seeing it. Then we also have the video transmitter power and the TX power. So if we go to the TX power first of all, we can set the RF output of the Ghost remote control system. You can see currently it's set to manual and 350 milliwatts, but obviously that's not what is legal here. Here we would be legal with 25 milliwatt. So I would set it to 25 milliwatt, and that is what I would use here in this location. But you can also set it to auto as well if you want to. Then we have the options for the VTX, allowing us to set the physical RF power for our analog transmission. We can go into the video VTX screen. Here we can set our channel. We can set our band. So for instance, we've got our channel options, band, which we can move through from IRCs, race band, band E, B, A, back to IRC. And then at the bottom, you've got the RF power settings. So here we can set it for 25, 100, 350, 1 watt, 1.5 watt, or max. Obviously, if you set this, you need to make sure that you do save this configuration. You need to make sure you press this little send button down here. So for instance, if I wanted to set this to 1.5 watts, you would then set it and press send. Something to note is if you don't press send and you go back and then you go back in, you'll notice whilst it will show it here, it hasn't actually saved. When you reconnect, so if I come out to here, go back in, go into VTX, you can see it's now showing 25 milliwatts. It's really important that when you change the power setting, so if I change it down to 1 milliwatt, you click send and that sends it to the VTX to save it. So don't just set it. There's a bit of a difference in how it behaves in the sense of the VTX has a send button to make sure that you save the settings, whereas the TX Power doesn't. The TX Power just changes on the screen, whereas on the VTX you have to actually press the button. Now, I'm not 100% sure, but you should also be able to configure this via Betaflight, although mine didn't appear to be configured to do that from the factory, but there isn't a reason I believe that you couldn't set that up if you weren't using the Orqa RC control system. Now, as we were talking about Betaflight, and this is a bind and fly drone, I just want to give you a quick warning. Do not be tempted to upgrade the version of Betaflight that this drone comes pre-installed with. It may not come with the latest version, but don't worry, it will be fine. It comes pre-configured from Orqa, ready to use. All you need to do is do the RC setup as I've shown here today and enjoy how the drone flies. There may be reasons later down the line to upgrade Betaflight's version. However, it is not like updating the firmware on, say, a DJI Mavic. Those drones will just update and work. There is pre-configured settings on this for the OSD, for the analog setup, for the flight controller that you will need to do if you were upgrading the firmware. And it's just a lot of unnecessary hassle on day one to mess with it. I always say just leave it alone, do what you need to do and enjoy the quad as it comes. And then only later, when you understand what is necessary, if you feel it's necessary, is it worth considering upgrading the version that it comes pre-installed with. Now, with regards to the FPV video setup as it's analog, that is really straightforward. It's the same as any other analog FPV system. I've got that rapid fire module installed in the Orqa goggles, and that's currently in SPI mode. You can actually control the rapid fire via the Orqa goggles menu. You don't have every option in there, but you can control things like the channel selection, and it just makes it easier than using the joystick on the side, but you can do it that way there if you want to. Now, if I just push the quad back to there, you should now be able to see me coming through on the video. So there you can see it's all set up. So the next thing we need to do is get it out for a flight. Now, to test this quad, I first of all took it to the field. This is my usual shakedown ground just to make sure it behaves as expected. This is simply to make sure we don't have anything go wrong in a controlled environment. All I ever do when I do my first couple of flights is make sure it reacts as I expect, get a bit of a feel for how the quad behaves, how the rates are set. I have to say, out the door, I think Orqa have done a very good job of tuning this quad. The rates are very nice for me. About the only change I would make is add a little bit more expo on the throttle, but other than that, the tune on it is very well done. Then, amongst the horrible weather that we've had here in the UK, I didn't manage to get it down the beach. Here, this will give you a bit of a nice look of how this camera looks. You did see it a bit at the field, but on the beach, it gives you a better view of the image that you can get from this analog FPV camera. And more than anything, I was just doing some flights up and down the beach, around the waves. Again, this ain't bando bashing. This is not remotely pushing this quad into what it's capable of doing. But for me, it actually does a good good job as a bit of a cruiser as well. It is tuned sharper though than you will find some of the other quads on the market. It isn't quite the cruiser like the Nazgul or the Speedy Bee. It's definitely a 5-inch freestyle tuned quad, and I do have to say I really do like how it flies. Okay, so it's time for me to share with you my thoughts on the Dream X from Orqa. But before we do that, we need to talk about price. Now, this quad is going to be available in the two versions, as I've said. You've got the analog bind and fly that you see here, which is going to be €429.95, and the HD ready version, which is bring your own HD VTX, is going to be available for $399.95. Now, these are going to be available directly from Orqa, and there will be a link to their website in the description. Okay, so my thoughts on the Dream X. Now, there have been so many things that have conspired against me on this review to stop me getting footage to show you. I'm really disappointed I haven't had more, but I have had quite a bit of stick time. Unfortunately, the weather has been all over the place. Holiday makers are everywhere. Dog walkers seem to be everywhere when I go to fly. And in fact, I got chased by a dog the first flight I had with this quad, which ended up causing me to crash because it was literally following it around the whole field. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't land. In the end, I tried to sort of bin it into some bushes, and that resulted in me bending up one of the props. However, I have to say, I think this is a fantastic 5-inch quad. In fact, I have close to zero complaints. There's only one little thing I will mention in a minute that I think could be improved. Orqa have done a great job on the build quality, the design, and the execution. The tuning is very good out the factory. About the only thing I would change is a little bit more expo on the throttle. It works really well out the door. It's tuned very nicely. It's not as dumbed back as some of the other bind and flies are. It's just tuned like you'd expect a 5-inch freestyle quad to be tuned. The build is really good. One of the best build qualities that I have seen on a quad. It's that simple. And really, we're today not going to get what's amazing on one 5-inch versus what's terrible on another. Building a 5-inch quad now is really pretty much nailed by everyone. But what Orqa have done here is done it very well. And there's literally only one thing that I would change, and that is the props. What I will say is I was getting a little bit of jello from these props in flight. That, though, may have been caused by that first crash that I mentioned earlier, because I did bend up two of the tips, although I did straighten them out. I, though, in my testing, swapped out the props for a standard set of 5 inches, and they were perfect. The folding props are actually really quite handy, but you do get little quirks with them not always being straight when you arm. You get like a bit of vibration as it settles out. I would personally prefer going with just standard props. It's nothing against the quad itself, though. You're going to want more props anyway, so that's something you can easily solve. I actually also like the integration on this quad with the Orqa system. So what I mean about that is, obviously this comes pre-fitted with that hybrid VTX, which means it's got Ghost. The system I've been using here is this remote. I'll talk about this in a separate video in the near future. And what I do like is the fact that it's got Bluetooth. You can configure it via your smartphone. You can actually control the VTX via that as well. It's a real nice integration. It obviously pairs up really well with the Orqa goggles and the rapid fire module as well. The analog camera on this looks as good as I've seen from any of the other analog cameras out there. It's in the higher end of what you get from analog, and really Orqa have just done a great job of building a decent 5-inch freestyle quad, and really there's nothing more to say than that. Now, there are obviously people who might be interested in this quad but don't want to go into Orqa's ecosystem with regards to remote controlling. And it wouldn't be particularly difficult to change this out to another RC system if you wanted to. There are not proprietary components in here that you can't mess with. The flight controller supports UARTs. You could put on whatever you want as well. So again, don't necessarily be put off if you've already got a remote control system and you don't want to move into Ghost. You can absolutely put in any other remote control system in this that you want, as you could with any other 5-inch quad. So in the end, what's not to like? Orqa, I think, have done a really great job here. And as I've said already, if you're interested in getting one, there will be a link to it in the description. Now, in the near future, I am going to be talking about this remote in more detail. If you're interested in seeing that, please do make sure you are subscribed to the channel. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts, your questions. If you've got them, please do put them down below. And finally, I just want to say a big thank you to Orqa for sending this one over for us to take a look at. It's a really nice piece of kit. And if you'd like to support the channel to allow us to keep making content in the future, please do consider checking out the links to my Patreon, as well as Buy Me a Coffee in the description as well. It's only through the support of my patrons I'm able to keep making content on this channel. And if you'd like to support us to allow us to keep making content in the future, please do consider checking it out. There's a link to Patreon, as well as Buy Me a Coffee there as well. There is also a link to my FPV wiki if you're interested in seeing that too. On my FPV wiki, I do put images of a lot of the stuff I tear down on this channel. So again, there'll be a link to that, including my Discord there as well. Anyway, that's it from me. Look after yourself, stay safe. I will speak to you soon.